So the Structure of Design Initiative, tell me about this. How did it come about, and what are you trying to achieve?
Well, it came about because, the book came about because a lot of people were on my tush to write a book. And most particularly world-famous sculptor Beverly Pepper and her husband Bill, who was a ex-Newsweek editor and very skilled in writing, and he kept saying, well, okay, I'll help you. And it's a wonderful, talented family. Their daughter, Jory, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, and their son is a director of films in Paris. Plays, actually, the theater, not films. I'm off base there.
So where do you fit in?
Well, we're all friends.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, they were really asking me to do that. And so I had been some years earlier at a place called MacDowell Colony in the United States, which is an artist colony in New Hampshire. So I applied for it and got admission to go again. And I spent 8 weeks there and wrote, I think, about 10,000 words. Never used any of it in the book. But it was, kind of a cleaning. It's sort of...
What ideas were you trying to get out?
In my life, I've been extremely fortunate working with some of the most talented architects on the planet and made good friends with them. I learned how to communicate with them, but also a lot of really tough things, projects that got into, not my project, well, it's mine. World Trade Center would be a good example, right? It was bombed and then it was destroyed completely and so forth. So I was trying to put together for young architects and engineers a kind of statement of how I felt about trying to go from here up to there in the profession. And as I try to say to them, you think you're in the architectural business, or you think you're in the engineering business, but you're not. You're in the communication business.
Architects are.
Engineers also, no difference whatsoever.
How so?
Absolutely.
Who are you communicating to? The occupants?
Well, if I have
of the
to
building?
communicate to an architect.
Sure.
So do you think that John Doe engineer can have lunch with IMP? I have lunch with him every other week, just the two of us.
You and IMP?
Yes. And I mean, he's 100 years old now. But I mean, if you don't know about architecture, if you don't know about dance, you don't know about the culture of the country you're working in and so forth, you're no place. I mean, you have to take what's in your head and take it down your arms, do pencil and make sketches and communicate.
So
and it's difficult to get both architects and engineers to understand that because they're also tied into their blooming computers.
Is there one thing that they don't understand about each other that would clear up a lot if they just did? How do architects speak to engineers now, and how could they do that better, and vice versa?
No, I don't know. I think the verbal communication is fine. It's not always verbal, but because there are a lot of reports and that sort of thing that have to be done. But on the other side of the coin, with IMP, I've done many, many projects with him. I don't think I ever got a single piece of paper from him, and I don't think he ever got a single piece of paper from me.
It was all just conversations?
We always talked.
And you think that's maybe better?
Absolutely.
How so?
Is there any better way to communicate than face to face?
I guess not, right.
Yeah,
But I mean, I guess I would think there's so much technical detail that you would need it written down, right? I mean, I'm sure at some point it does.
Eventually, you have to make drawings and details and so forth. But even that in today's world is difficult. The young design professional, be it architect or engineer, they sit in front of their computers and they make things and so forth. And sometimes a young engineer comes to me with a computer printout and starts talking, and I say, well, actually what I do, I sort of let my eyes glaze over like I'm completely bored. And then they understand that they have to come back with a sketch, because,
Why do you not engage with that?
I do, about how to get people to do that. There's the rub, you see. If you
take a sketch as opposed to a computer printout. A hand-drawn sketch, you think, is the difference?
You think if you're in a meeting and you have this PowerPoint presentation, whatever the hell you're using, right?
Yeah.
And somebody asks you a question, Are you going to reprogram your computer? No, you got to make a sketch. And interesting enough, I think in many ways engineers are better sketchers than architects, because architects make everything on the computer, whereas, at least in my experience, I make sketches and we have computer drafters who make the drawings. So I have to sketch as part of my life.
Do you think it's a personal style, or is it
No, I don't
inherently
think
better
so.
that everyone should be
Everyone
sketching?
should, clearly. I think if you talk with any successful person, they all understand that if you take Andy Warhol, the painter, right, and you take John Doe, the painter, the difference between them is not so much in their painting, but in their communication skills. I mean, Andy Warhol and all artists, I know many, they're very good communicators. And you go to these meetings that we're involved in right now, many of them are very good communicators. That's how they got where they are. Not necessarily because of ideas, they have to have ideas too. But not only did they have ideas, but they were able to communicate those ideas to people, not necessarily even in their own discipline, but outside of their own discipline.
Can you give an example of an idea that you wanted to communicate in your career and how you did that through your work?
Take the United States Steel building in Pittsburgh.
Sure.
When it was built, it was the largest privately owned building in the world. What does it look like? Well, the architects wanted to build a triangular shaped building and plan. And go up straight, no setbacks, no nothing.
Right.
And I thought that it would be much better if we notched the corners of the triangles. That way we would have 6 corner offices instead of 3. And we wouldn't have those big expanse of space out there a long ways from the lifts and so forth. So it was better office space, and I thought it would look better. And by the way, it responded much better in the wind. That is, it was less wind sensitive than the pure triangle, which is a very bad shape. Okay, so the developer wanted to make a rectangular building.
Yeah.
So we put together wind tunnel models of every kind of building shape, including ours and the architects and the developers, and round ones and other things, and compared them, how they performed in the wind. And we were able to show that our design was much better in terms of actual performance, and the rental people liked it much better, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the architects wanted to put the columns were outside the building completely. They were not inside the building, completely outside. And which meant that whenever you wanted to hold up the building, you had to pass something from the column into the building. So there are many penetrations of the curtain wall, many places for it to leak, and et cetera, et cetera. So they had the columns 39 feet, so I have to give you a U.S. measure because it's a U.S. building. And I said, well, why don't we put them 13 feet on center? 3 times as many columns. No, other way around. I got it completely wrong. They want them 13 feet on center. Why don't we put them 39 feet on center? And architect was unalterably opposed.
Why?
Because they like the rhythm to the other. But dollars prevailed, and we put them 39 feet on center, saved a lot of money.
Right.
And they connected the column back to the building at every floor, which is very rational, I guess you could say. And I said, well, why don't we do it every 3rd floor? We do every 3rd floor. Now we have only 1/9 as many penetrations of structure through the wall. And again, they saved a huge amount of money, and we use little posts to carry the 2 intermediate floors down to a kind of, we call it a primary floor, and on. I mean, there are many examples like that.
So that was an example of you communicating well with the rest of the team?
Absolutely. I don't mean I mean, everyone on
two-way
the
street.
team. You have to work
Sure.
with the mechanical engineer, you have to work with the architect, you have to work with the rental agent and the developer and the contractor.
What's the biggest impediment to a good communication between all those parties? Is it just everyone being busy, or what? Is it how they approach it, or like you said, people
Well,
using technology versus
Yeah,
hand
are
drafting?
we all different, aren't we? I mean, we're all different, and sometimes a given person is just not what they do. You know, they make their own, they do their own work and don't bother me with the rest of it. That's a not uncommon attitude on the part of others.
Do architects need to understand more about structural engineering, and structural engineers need to know more about design, or would that help? Is that possible? Is there something that each side can learn about the other that would make this communication, you know, easier and lead to better work?
Probably. I mean, I lecture at Harvard GSD, Harvard Graduate School of Design. They're architects. It's maybe the most famous architectural school in the United States. But those students they're all, the ones that I lecture to, they're all graduate students, and they all have one interest: design. They don't know anything about flashing, or you want to go down all the gory details of architecture, and nor do their professors. So it used to be that the sort of smaller colleges all taught that kind of stuff to architects, but even that's beginning to disappear because the smaller colleges have their ambitions to turn out the great designer.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
so there are some exceptions to that. I have a good friend. He's an architect, and he teaches basically the practical aspects of architecture in Philadelphia.
So they want the next big name
Everybody, yeah, and you know, this building was done by ex-architect. Ex-architect may never have seen anything of it. You know, he just
has his name on it.
has his name on it, right? I mean, the star architect, the great communicator.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily actually
Yeah.
doing so. There are notable exception to that. Bob Stern is a good example. Bob Stern goes to a project meeting, every project, every week.
Robert A. M. Stern, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
but I think that's very rare. That's very rare. Most architects don't have the patience for that.
Yeah. Is there something that would change that? I mean, that sounds like a problem with the profession, but I don't know how would you change
fundamental. It's a fundamental there. I think that A. Louise Huxtable, who's a very famous critic in the United States, maybe worldwide, she wrote an article one time, and she said, well, there was a time when the structural engineer calculated the structure, but today structural engineers are co-equal designers. Now, I think that's crazy. I mean,
Why?
Somebody's got to wave the baton. Somebody has to wave the baton. So, and the architect is a logical choice for that. The problem is that they have their own language in many ways, which is they have their own clothing in many ways.
Sure.
So,
Uniform.
Yeah, I know. So, and that's kind of unfortunate in many ways. You know, it is.
Why do you say that?
Well, because there should be a lot more camaraderie between people in the design professionals. We have my wife and I. She's a structural engineer, fantastic structural engineer. She's designed, I think, 3 of the 5 tallest buildings in the world. We have a little house out in Connecticut, about an hour and a quarter drive from where we live in Manhattan, and we have parties, and varies 30, 20, 30, 40, even 50, mostly architects who come.
Right.
Mostly architects who come. So, and that's good, I think, you know, to establish personal relationships with people. Well, I said I see IM every other week, but it's true.
Right.
But I mean, Eileen, his wife, really taught me how to shuck oysters. I mean, we're very close, you know, good friends.
So you have these close personal relationships, but then I also hear you saying that you don't like that maybe as a profession, big name architects, they tend to have a mystique. They're maybe standoffish. They're kind of keep to
Many are.
themselves. They have their own language and their own
Yes.
image that
But
they're maintaining.
I'm also saying you can break through that if you take the time
Yeah.
to learn what they want to talk about, then you can break through all of that. And I have many dear friends who are world famous architects, so and it's good, right? I think it's good, but it's more rare than a lot more rare than it should be. I think, yeah.
As you look back on all the work that you've done in your career, does one project stand out to you now as your favorite?
What makes a great project, in my mind, is not much more than just the people who are working on it. I mean, if you're working on it and you're learning and it's fun, and that's a great project. If the design is fantastic, but there are a bunch of clods out there, yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, you have often with the architect, you have to break through the sort of facade that they're mightier than anybody else.
How do you do that?
Often, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. You just, one thing, I'm very frank with architects, and maybe my favorite example, well, I have a whole bunch of them, but Gunnar Burkertz was he and Sylvia's wife, and we became great friends, but he came to our offices unannounced, no appointment, no nothing, and took him over by my desk. He sat down and talked for a couple of minutes. Then he said, "Of course you know my work." I said, "Gunnar, I never heard of you before in my life," which is the truth. And then he understood that whenever I say something to him, I'm saying what I feel here, I'm not trying to make him feel good, not at all. We're doing a project, IMP's last project, and we were having lunch in Gramercy Tavern, a restaurant that he enjoyed a lot in New York City, and he told me about it. And his idea was to take a Japanese fan and form it around a kind of a teardrop shaped plan, offset so that it sloped back away from the entrance. But it was, like a fan. And as we were about to leave, I said, when I look at that, I don't see a Japanese fan. What I see is a Danish lampshade. Stopped right there. We didn't discuss it any farther. The next morning, it was smooth.
Really? He didn't take that as an insult?
Absolutely not. We've worked together a lot.
Yeah. At that point, you already had a rapport.
Yeah, so
sure.
Whether I had it or not, I give you two different examples. One where I knew the man really well, and one where I never met him before in my life.
Either case,
they
both
works.
responded well to
of course, if you're honest with people, well.
Could you think of a time when that didn't work?
There's a certain politeness in life that's important sometimes. I mean,
Sure.
if you say a pretty girl, it's okay to admire her dress even though you don't like it very much. You know what I'm trying to say?
You're talking about tact.
Sure. I'm not saying you have to be brutally blunt with everybody in your life. But in the profession, I think you can't play games with people.
That sounds straightforward enough. What do you think keeps people from doing that? Why do people not?
I don't know.
You don't think it's anything cultural or about education of architects or how the profession operates?
It's not architects, it's professions in general.
Yeah. Huh.
I don't know. I don't understand architecture. But I would say the big gap between the architect and the engineer in the building design business, because architects do lots of things, a lot of design furniture and
right, sure.
I work with architects in furniture design. No, I'm not knocking that at all. It's good fun. But often they're not very good business people, and they don't pay their bills very fast, or maybe they don't even pay them at all. And it's that gap in payment is an issue between.
So they're not very good business people. They're not very good business people as a rule, or generally speaking.
They're not. No, they're not.
And
often they have business managers who are very good, and but many of them don't And so it's just, money's an ongoing problem in in that arena. It doesn't matter what kind of engineer you are or what kind of architect you are, it's still whether it's a landscape architect or interior designer or what we normally think of as architect, they're all.
But you were saying engineers and architects are something they don't understand about each other? And what was that?
I think all too often each of us focuses on our own world, right? And they're not terribly interested in and haven't educated themselves to think about that which is outside of that. So that's a great hindrance, in my view, to communication. And the very successful engineers, of course, are very good at communicating their ideas and they learn about culture and et cetera. You know, in the Second World War, I dropped out of high school and joined the Navy, and I never heard a shot fired in anger, but which is pretty lucky, I would say. But you know, I look at what the United States did in the bombing of Dresden, or the firebombing of Tokyo, or of course the 2 atomic bombs in Japan, aimed at civilian targets. If you read the morning paper in New York, if U.S. forces killed 10 civilians, it's front page news. Then killed thousands and nobody even knew about it. It's a different, world's changed a lot. You know, I was the manager of a gasoline station when I was a freshman in high school.
Yeah, was that your first job?
No, I worked all my life.
What was your first job?
I don't know. I worked in agriculture, I worked in cattle, I worked in machinery, I worked in automobiles.
How did you end up in the design world?
I don't know. I got a Bachelor of Science degree at Berkeley after, well, I dropped out for a year and taught school.
Yeah.
So my first job was a mathematician.
Really?
My second job was in the same group as an electrical engineer.
I guess you could draw a straight line from that to structural engineering and
I
design.
did eventually get
Sure.
there.
Do you remember what it first was that inspired you
sure.
to
No,
go to that field?
I was working in the electrical department and I'd come up with a lot of ideas. I mean, I had mathematical skills that the electrical engineers didn't have. So I could do things they couldn't do. And the chief engineer, who, by the way, was a structural engineer, he came over and said, well, you should come work in the structure department. So I did that.
Remember what you first started working on? I wonder if you could recall
First
what sort of
project
projects you were working on.
Yeah. You know what a retaining wall is, right? It's a big wall and you can put something against one side. Well, this was a retaining wall for a sand and gravel plant. And it was serpentine and plan. So you fill this here and that one over there and so forth, back and forth, so different sizes, etc. But the structural engineers didn't know how to analyze it.
Yeah.
Because, well, today they would know how to do it, but at that time there were no computers or, you know, that sort of thing.
So it was just a complex enough system that it was
It
hard
was
to
complex enough so
model.
that they just didn't know how to do it. So I was able to do that. That was my first job. I was able to do that.
And you found that exciting, I guess?
Yeah, I did.
It sounds like maybe, though, you think a sand and gravel retaining wall would not be the sexiest project, you know? But I guess you
It
found
was
it.
pretty sexy to me.
Right, right.
Yeah, no.
And it sort of sparked an interest in you and
Yeah,
you wanted to learn
and
more.
then I worked on an island offshore of California. It was the protection against waves was what we call a tetrapod. It's
Like a seawall?
no, it's an island, and you have to protect the island from the waves that come against it. So tetrapod's a big thing, bigger than this room, with four arms equally spaced around. And so I worked both theoretically and in models, how to use the tetrapods effectively in resisting the waves. And that got built, called Rincon Island. And then there was a causeway that went out to the island, out into the ocean. And design had been prepared for it. And it was like any other causeway, you know, it had columns on a regular basis and batter piles and all that stuff. That was done in the office where I was working in San Francisco, and I looked at it and said, well, and I made a couple of sketches, took it to the guy who ran the place, a brilliant engineer, and I said, well, you know, it's a one-lane road. Why do we have to have piles like this? Why can't we just put them in the middle? Because that's where the trucks are going to go, right down the middle. And we could put 2 piles and then 1 pile and then 2 piles and 1 pile, and there was this and then that and so forth, and saved a huge amount of money, made it much faster to build. I'm good at things like that.
Well,
They're not very sexy, you might say, but I
Right.
enjoyed it a lot.
Right. Is there something that unifies all that work? I mean, you've done everything from, you know, massive iconic structures to, like you said, a retaining wall or these smaller elements of structural
Chairs.
chairs.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm good at outhouses and chairs and
Well, famously,
churches and museums.
Who was it Mies that said that the chair was the hardest thing to design?
Probably so, yes. But a lot of amazing the number of architects actually who are very interested in furniture.
Right, and
Yeah.
you as well.
And me too, yeah. I like that.
Structurally speaking, though, chair doesn't seem that hard, is it? What's so complicated about a chair structurally?
Well, it depends on the chair. You know, the big sofa, you know, leather covered, so there's no structure in there worth discussing, except try to make it lighter, perhaps. But then a lot of chairs are very elegant, and you have to carefully think about them and how to structure them so that they stay elegant and light and so forth. I'm not a designer of chairs. I'm a designer of making the chairs work.
Well, thanks for entertaining my kind of wide-ranging questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to get to, especially about, you know, your latest work that I didn't ask about that you'd like me to?
I gave a lecture in Los Angeles to a bunch of engineers, and it was about recognition. So I was talking about recognition.
Recognition of what?
Of the individual. You know,
Okay.
how do you become, quotes, recognized? Or even what does that mean?
Yeah.
And when I'd finished, this professor got up and he said, look, he said, you know, all I want to do is my research. I don't want to get involved in the world around me. I just want to do my research, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty blunt with him. I said, well, by the way, you're supposed to be teaching once in a while too, so you should get onto that.
Sure.
And you want recognition, but the recognition you're going to get is for this tiny group of persons in your field. But if you want to be recognized outside of that, then you got to get out and live. You can't just.
Do you think there should be more architects and engineers should engage people
Absolutely.
outside of the profession more?
Well, you don't have to start with architects and engineers. Architects, engineers, and everybody else need to get out and get involved. I mean, you know, in the United States, we have big election coming up soon. You know, all of our House will get elected and a third of the Senate.
Midterms, yeah.
Right. So if you're interested, you should do that. And my wife and I, we rent 55-person buses to take protesters to Washington. And it doesn't matter whether you're for us or against us, we mush them all into the same bus and make the conversation lively and et cetera. You know, and you need more of that. It's hard to get young architects and engineers to do that sort of thing.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. You know, when I was 20, before I was 20, I was haranguing crowds of over 1,000 people about the peace movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but you don't really see that much anymore.
You certainly do see some architects being political, but I'd say
Some
that there are as
architects
many
and
that would like to refrain from being political, right? I mean, I guess there's a professional risk, some would say.
Well, getting involved does not necessarily be political. I mean, it's societal is maybe a better word for where I live. I mean, I'm for peace and nonviolence, and is that political? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think of it as political anyway.
Yeah.